Okay, primer's all dry, and as we said, we popped around and had a look at a few little areas where we just needed to sort it out. Like down here, I had a panel line not quite going all the way through. Same on the other side. So what I've done, I've gone around and touched those in. A couple other little bits and pieces of sort and thought, yeah, it needs a little bit more work there. Had a little bit of cracking down here. I'm not quite sure why. Obviously the paint thinner, so I've just used a different colour. That's why it's slightly shiny in that area. Okay, so as you can see, we've already done it on the bottom, so I'll give you a quick run through of actually what we've done. We've pre-shaded it. The reason for pre-shading is to cause a shadow effect on the paintwork. We've spoken about it a lot before. Works really well on greys and whites. Camos and blues and things like that don't really work as well, but certainly this is going to be, underside's going to be white, and this will be invaluable for a way of breaking it up and stop it really looking like a brick. So that's the thing with that. So I'll give you a quick run through. We've got in here quite a thick mix of flat black. So all we're going to do, if we do it around the front area here, is we're just going to grab a wing. Okay, so we're just picking out the gap between, like here, the flap and the fuselage, getting an enormous amount of paint, and then obviously other ones just getting a smaller amount. Because of the size of it, we are over-exaggerating what it is. So what I mean over-exaggerating, this is 1/32 scale, so it's quite big. So we can make the black a lot wider than it is. When we put the top colour over it, because it's a light grey, or even a beige really, it will show through quite easily. If you're going over something very dark, you know, it's best to put a lot, very heavy, thick black lines down to help them shine through. But say, because it's a lighter colour, we won't need too much. So everywhere else is just going to get quite nice wide lines of it. You know, it's not going to be detailed and crispy because we want them all to nicely fade in. And as I said before, don't worry about them being straight. Don't worry about them being even. You just need them to be sort of, you know, very random. So make them quite thick. Some of them, make others very thin. You know, make them a little bit wonky. And that way it'll stop it looking like a grid. When you put the paintwork over the top, you don't want it to look like a grid. We want to make it look quite uneven and interesting. So we're just going to pop around various areas. Now obviously we're going to do a certain amount of weathering to these, so as we go through it all. So down here is going to be one of my really heavy weathered areas. So we're making these quite strong, quite random. Okay, as we go through these, so I do these one hand because I'm not the steadiest of airbrushes. Okay, just like so. Picking out those panel lines, going to have, say, quite a bit going on here, so that's why it's having quite a strong bit of paint. Okay, now the thing is, when you get riveting detail, obviously riveting will attract dirt and everything as well. So where you see lines of rivets going off, you can give them a bit of a shadowing, obviously not too heavy of paintwork. Access panels, they're getting a good old splash of it there. We're just doing the edges there of various bits. So what I'm going to do is carry on working all the way around this one, putting all these lines and lovely detail in, and it'll make it, help it stand out, and then we can get on with some paint. Okay, so now we're basically ready for painting on the white and everything else. Now, so for this one we're going to be using extra acrylic white. It's quite nice because it's a gloss finish. The only thing is, it does tend to clog up. It's almost got a best way to do it, like an emulsion finish to it, so you get a bit of skin around the top. If that gets in your airbrush, it's good night. It spits, kicks and everything. Quick tip to get around that: what I do, you grab yourself a pair of tights or something like that. Okay, so don't tell the missus, but here we go. Okay, I've got a plastic pot here, which is obviously one of my wash bottles. All I do, cut the end off. Okay, gives us our little bottle just like this. And then all we do is pop it over the end, just like so. And then we're just going to pop a rubber band around the neck. A bit big this rubber band for this, but you'll get the point. Okay, just like so. And there we have our mesh cleaning system. So you've got mesh in the bottom, that'll catch all the bits. It's quite a tight mesh to it anyway, but if you wanted to, you could double it over again and give you even more of a finer mesh type of thing. But I should think that would probably be okay for it. Alright, and then I've got these, which are my little pots that we do. It just sits in the top like that. We can pour our paint into this. So we'll come along with our paint. Okay, and unscrew the top. To be honest, this is a new one, so it will be okay. But if we pop, then all we do, we have it like this. You can hold it in, you can pour your paint in. It then goes through, when we see it going through like that. And it's catching all the nasties will be caught in the top. And then what I tend to do is put the thinners in the top of it as well, because that will rinse it through. That will help just it all flow through. So we've done like a 50-50 mix, and then I just use a cotton bud, give it a wipe round, just like so. And that way we've got here, let's put that to one side, we've got a mix now, very nicely done. So what we'll do is we just give this a bit of a mix round in the old colour cup, just like this. And we know this is purely filtered, no lumps, bumps, nasties or anything else like that. And that, to be honest, is the main trouble with acrylics paints. As soon as you get one of those little bits go down inside it, that's it, it's good night. Because it just will not clear. It's a real pain to get it to clear. Now, to be honest, I'm going to use a little bit of liquid reamer in here first to make sure the airbrush is nice and clean, because it hasn't been used today. So just to make sure it's flowing, there's no nasty stuck in there. Big thing to remember, if you're going to put reamers or anything near this paint, it will turn it to literally glue. It will turn to tar. So once you've done that, come in with your little bit of a airbrush cleaner, your acrylic one, put that one through and just blow through that, because you want it to coat the inside of your airbrush and everything like that. Because if this mixes with the paint, you will have a certain amount of trouble. Okay, so we just wipe all that over. So same thing again, I'm just double checking. I'm going to put a bit of acrylic around the outside of the colour cup, everything in like that. I'm just going to blow that off into the filter. And it's this type of little bits of prep work which will really help. A couple of minutes doing this will save you a heartache later on. So we've got our paint, we're going to pour that into our colour cup, pop in about half. Okay. This is thinned over 50%. It's a very thin, what I call a wet mix. You might hear me talk about these. I've covered this before, but just in case you're new, when I say a wet mix, I mean it's very wet, more thinners to paint. If I say a dry mix, it's more paint, okay, than it is thinners. So what we're going to do now is go across the underside of this. Now, because this is a wet mix, it won't cover it very well. It's going to take its time to cover it, but that's what we want. We want it to go through like this and gently build up our paint. Okay, now there's no rights and wrongs to this, it literally just spraying it on. Alright, and we're going to build it up as we go, and you can probably see it already, we're turning white. Alright, now we're getting a bit smoky in here, so what we're going to do, just put our extractor on, get the pipe sorted in. Okay, cut to air, dry it down a little bit. Remember, this is a gloss paint, so it will look wet anyway. Okay, and then we can come back and we just build up another layer. Because it's primed, it should go on quite evenly. Okay. And we can go around. Now remember, because it's pre-shading, we obviously want this to show through. But don't be surprised if it disappears altogether, because you'll come back in half an hour's time and it will be back. It will come back. So this one going on first. Because it's primed, you should get away with it going on quite nicely. Okay, if you find it's not covering at all, or something like that, or perhaps you're not using a primer, it might be better to put on a dry mix first, okay, and then come back afterwards. Now we've got a tiny bit of spitting occurred there. That's what we were speaking about earlier, where if we move the camera right the way in, you might see that little white lump on the end. Okay, it's a tiny bit of build up, and what it does, it sort of ruins the spray pattern, for want of a better word. Okay, so we'll do come back. Okay, that's one colour cap gone, so we'll just pour in our second one. And that's all we're going to do. We're going to keep going over here, building up layers with paint. And if it's looking wet and not nice, just back off. Go off somewhere else. Obviously we've got to do tailplanes back here and all sorts as well. So we can do them all at the same time. Okay, and just keep going over it. At the same time, we're obviously going to do all of this lot. This is the things like the weapons, the flaps, obviously the tails, the outer wing, we won't worry about them. But certainly we can do all the gear doors. We've got all of this stuff as well, the main gear, weapons pylons, things like that, they can all be done, and everything else. So anything that's going to be white, now's the time to do it, because what we can do then is mask it up and then carry on afterwards. Okay, so as you can see, we've actually gone around and masked up everywhere on there. So we haven't gone overboard on the underside masking, we've just done the areas going to do. Because obviously the ones down this front end, they're going to be freehand, you know, we can just blend them in. At this scale, really easy to do. Obviously if you're dealing 1/72 out, you can mask them up in 1/48. But on this one, I want a nice blended in edge to it and going through. So now the big thing is to remember, there's certain areas like down in here you can hear it's very, very rough, and we said about this before about prepping your actual areas. So if you just give them the entire model, just literally a light rub over, have a feel around it and feel for rough areas. So if you just get a polishing stick, you know, say I do one, and you just pop round, you'll find it keys it in and it just smooths down and it makes everywhere for a nice smooth finish. And it'll stop you getting, perhaps sometimes you get that thing of, especially down in here, you get the vortices of the air running around. Okay, so all we do, we literally just give it a gentle rub over and feel it. If it feels rough, like it does here a bit, so where we've done this white work, we can just give it a bit more of a keying in. Okay, feels a bit rough down here. That's more like it. Okay, we've got a little bit just up here. But it's important to do these things because it'll give you a nice thing. Now obviously with this thing, because we're going to beat this thing up to hell quite frankly, going to give it lots of weathering all over it. So it's got that sort of, you know, worn in, textured look that obviously old aircraft get after many years of being in service. See, this side is particularly rough. Okay, so obviously we don't have to worry too much about its preparation work because it's slightly rough. It works in our favour because the wash and things like that, it will give it something to bite onto and to stick to. That's more like it. So we just finish this. Now, as I'm doing this, a couple of things to remember. Obviously the paint we're using, and that's one of them, just broken off the pitot tube at the top, so we won't worry about that. But things to remember is obviously your paintwork, how you're going to do it. If you want it to be a nice glossy finish, quite a rough finish and things like that, you know, you can obviously change your variables now. Obviously your air pressures and things like that can change. Obviously with this one we've got to do some green tips on it. Do you want to do them before or after and things like that? I'll do all mine after, I find it easier. Some of the panels are deliberately left open so we can take care of them. So just little bits of forethought that you think ahead and think, will it be easier to do it now or after, things like that. Make sure your Tamiya tape or your tapes are certainly all stuck down, nice hard edges, that there's nothing sticking up so things can bleed through. And these are all little things you do now which save you a lot of time of having to go back and do it afterwards. So okay, quick chat about paint. Now for this one we're going to be using the Guns Sanyo Mr. Hobby. This is their acrylic, although mind you it's more like an enamel. This is their, because it's FS 16440. Which is the old light dull grey colour. Now I like this one, it seems to be probably the only one which is pretty much spot on, but there is some other options. Tamiya X20A isn't that far out, okay, so if you're a Tamiya person that's really a good colour to go with, and then obviously you've got extra acrylics, and then to tell you the truth though, Model Air don't actually do one that's a good match to this one. So that's it really, we're all sorted, ready to go. So if we get some paint on this one. So usual thing with the airbrush, we're going to be shooting around about. Turn the air pressure down just a little. So we're shooting around about 20-25 psi. We're going to do a 50-50 mix. So we got, probably got too much thinners in there. So we do half thinners to half paint. Now, a lot of people would say to me, you can't mix these two paints together. X20A and Mr. Hobby Colour paints go together. I have actually got their proper thinners for it, but I tell you what, I prefer the Tamiya ones. Okay, so I've got a clean brush and I'm going to mix them together. When you're mixing a paintbrush in your colour cup, make sure the hairs don't come out, because if the hairs get out down the business end of your airbrush, it can cause you all loads and loads of trouble. Okay, so a good old mix is essential for doing any painting, and when you're mixing two different people's thinners, make sure you give it an extra bit of a go, because obviously we've got Tamiya thinners in with Mr. Hobby paint. They're not 100% designed for each other. Some of them will just work really well, others don't. I know some people use cellulose thinners or lacquer thinners to thin this stuff, which works very well, but personally I'm an acrylic man through and through, so that's what I stick with. Now, normally I would do this in my spray bay, but I can't get the camera in there and me and the size of the model, so what I'm going to do is literally just behind you. I'm going to turn it on. It gets a bit noisy, but to be honest it'll save me getting covered in everything. So okay, we're going to take nice and easy with this one. Okay, we're going to start on the spine and work our way over. So all we're going to do is very nice light sprays. Immediately having a look at it, think, right, okay, is that looking too wet? Is it looking too thick? Is it really spicky? If it's really, sorry, spicky, making up words on this build. If it's really speckly, okay, try upping your air pressure before you thin your paint, okay? Because your paint might not be, just might be, needs a little bit more work to go. So we just turn that up a little bit, okay, and try again, and that's more like it. So we're just going to spray this one down. Light coat to start with. Not going to go anything massive over the top, but we just keep it moving. When things are looking wet, I know obviously this is where I do my banging on about how to airbrush, but if it's looking wet, move away from it, go somewhere else. Don't worry about if your pre-shading disappears, because it will come back, trust me. Okay, so we just move up on the back here, just around this tail area. We're going to have to do that twice because we're going to have to move it. Right, so to start with this wing, we're going to come in around about 45 degrees shooting down, so we get a nice blend with the white. Okay, so we're just coming in 45 degrees down. Done that area, so now we'll move off. Let's say, well, plenty of the pre-shading to go through, so we'll hold off. So there we go, we're looking like that so far on this half. Okay. We're just going to pop along now and do this front end, which is a bit tricky for you guys to see because it's at my angle. So we're just lowering the amount of paint. Okay, we're not doing anything too sharp or messy down here at the moment, because what we'll do is afterwards, when this is slightly dry, we'll come back, okay, and we'll sharpen up these lines between the white and the actual the gold grey. Just work our way over the top of the spine. Remember to do your leading edges and your tails, things like that. Okay. Now obviously on this one we've got a couple of things, like it's got a black anti-glare sheen on the front, so we're not going to worry about the front too much. Okay. So come along here. Just remember to come in from all the angles, around your glass work on the top, and then from this side you can shoot down and get to the inside of the intake on the other side. Okay, there's one colour cup gone. And already you might be able to see on this wing, you can see the pre-shading starting to come through. As I say, it's starting to come through. Obviously this centre section's quite dark, we're going to have to give it another coat. But to be honest, it's only a shading technique we're going to do to give it some grime. We're going to go over this and mottle this thing right up, and obviously we're going to do a bit of post shading with it as well. Anyway, there's the first coat out of the way. I'm going to carry on and do the other half, and then you can meet me at the end for tidying up some of these edges. Okay, so those have been drying now for a few minutes, so it's got, you know, obviously if you're using this type of paint, it doesn't dry as quick as everyone else's. So what happens is it gets like a skin on it that you think, oh, that's quite dry, and then you hold it and put a thumbprint in it. So don't touch the actual model. Okay, so next thing we want to do is give it a little bit of post shading into it, and what I call bleaching. So the easiest way for that is plenty of thinners, okay, more thinners than normal. Okay, take your original base colour, okay, and then about 50%, and then we're going to pick another grey. So we just want a light grey. So if we pick something like, he says, just going through here, a light grey. So if we pick out here, we've got FS, I'll tell you what we will do actually, scrap that. We'll use a little bit of XF19, because we've got a bit here on the go. That's it, this is the good one. And we'll mix the paints a little bit together. So what we're going to do with this, take a couple of drops, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is thin stuff already, it's just the end of a cup I've got on the go. Okay, we've mixed it in, and then we get a good old mix together. What you're trying to do is lighten the colour and give it a grimy type of effect. And when you first look at it, you think, well, that's not doing much. But obviously, don't forget, we're going to do this a couple of times. So what this should do is bleach it out a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it on this panel, end panel here. We can bring you in a little bit. So we've got it in here like this, and then all we're going to do is pick out some centres of the panels, he says, with it rolling over, okay, and we're trying to randomly put them in, so you might be able to see it happening on there already. Okay, so all we're trying to do is blotch it and make it quite random like this. Then obviously we'll come along with darker colours, with post shading and pre-shading and things like that, and go right the way over it everywhere else. So what we can do is carefully bring the said phantom over a little bit. Okay, and all we're going to do is just work around some post shading bits. And obviously the thing is, this is a different texture of paint as well, because it's got a real deep flat. It's not like a gloss perhaps you would find on the Tamiya one, on the extra acrylic-y ones and things like that. Because this is a flat, it'll give a different texture to the paint as well. So all we're doing is picking out centres of panels, okay, and perhaps some random scuffing and blotchiness going in. As I say, and it should be quite subtle this, because you don't want it to stand out, because we're going to do post shading afterwards, which is going to make it stand out a lot more. Okay, so just the centres of panels. This tail is going to be a little bit tricky because of obviously the different colours involved up here. We've got insignia and markings to go on there as well. Okay, quite a bit around the front end of the cockpit. Okay, and carefully we're trying to turn this around. Being rather delicate, as delicate as you can be. Okay. And because this is thinned a lot more, it will blend in. Okay. So you don't have to worry about it suddenly marking the areas, because it's very thin and weak. Okay, then afterwards we're just going to lightly airbrush a coat of this right the way over, just to lighten it all, because then you can come back with the original colour. To give darker lines over it. So as you can see, it's all very, very random. Okay, that's that in. So then what we'll do again, we'll take a little bit more of this grey, and we'll use okay, into the mix. A little bit more. into this mix, and then we're going to re-thin it down a little bit more. So this is like the third colour going on, which now will be quite different to the original one. But there again, because it's thinned, it shouldn't give us a huge difference in colour. We're looking for subtle changes in the colour, not massive. So this one is more just popping everywhere. Okay, you're just trying to keep it really, really random. And then just light blow-ins over the top. And all you're really trying to do is bleach out and weather the aircraft. So we're sort of coming along. It's going to be quite tricky on this because it's glossy, but we're trying to bleach out and just instantly age. Over. I've actually spilt paint on the wing, which isn't a good look just here. So we're just going to take that off. Okay, here's a quick tip. As you can see now, we've actually made a bit of a mess here, and we've spilt paint on the wing, and we've wiped it off just like so. If we get the camera on this, we'll be alright. Come on, camera. We go. So what we're going to do, lightly build up over the top, dry, cut to air, wet coat over the top, cut to air, and we're just going to blend it in. So just dry it all off, next coat goes over, dry it off. So you just air, paint, air, paint, air, paint, and just keep building it up. And obviously, because this is quite a wet coat, what we'll do in a moment, we'll come back and really touch that in quite heavily. As you can see, it's going already. Well, I'm happy we'll lose that. And so we'll just crack on with these other areas. Right the way over, and all we're trying to do is darken it down and sort of grey it out and make it bleachy. And when you see it compared, he says, knocking it again, with the original, you can see it's changing its colour quite a bit. Just remember, once you put it on, to give it a blow right the way over, and that will just help it blend all in and stop you getting sharp edges on it. Okay, so just like that. So the thing is, we'll just keep it on that area just down there, which is almost gone now. So we just give it a nice thick coat, just like that. And we're out of paint. So now all we're going to do is literally, we're going to pop in with mainly thinners. Okay, a tiny drop of our original colour. Okay. Just mix up some of this. This is just the grey, but it's separated because I didn't shake it well. Quite a bit of the grey paint. And the reason for using grey is because it will change its colour, but not by much. If you were to be using a white, obviously you would bleach it out completely. If you were using a black, you would darken it. A grey just gives you a subtle change without going totally over the top. Okay, so we just go like that. So we just check our flow. Now what we're going to do now is literally, if we just turn this around so we don't have that wing down here. Any trouble with this size camera. Okay, all we're going to do is pop along panel lines. Okay, tiny bit of airflow through here. Just going to pop along the panel lines and just to, like a post shading effect onto it. Okay, and you should see it sort of all come to life a little bit.
I'm just trying to break it up. And then by the time this gets a wash on it and everything else, it should look absolutely great. So all we're doing in all of these is just trying to change the balance of the paintwork, and just to give it a little shading. So you might be able to see it just down there on the wing. You can see that sort of greyness coming into it. And as I say, we'll go around and we'll pick out little individual panels and areas where we want to grey it up. And this will just work very well with something we got coming up a little bit later. And as I say, it's one of those things, it's an effect, so don't worry about it being too strong or not strong enough or anything else like that. Because as I say, it is an effect rather than a rule of thumb type of thing you're doing, okay? So you might want to pop out a couple of panels or add it to various areas and things like that. Just the right blow over everywhere with it, just to sort of stain it in. Okay, let me just work around this wing area. Just be careful of that touch in we did. It's still very, very wet. And there we go, that's the type of effect we're going for. If I very carefully pick this up, bring you out a little bit, you can see what we're trying to get here by giving it this sort of post shading in, griminess. And I know in this light it's a bit of a nightmare trying to show you, and obviously because it's size, but you get the idea of what we're doing. Okay, now if it's looking a little bit too strong and it's jumping at you just a little bit much, just blow over a very light coat right the way over everything. As I say, because it literally will just help it to blend in. And as I say, because I want this to look like it's had a hell of a life, it's really old, it's coming to the end and having engine troubles and all things like this, so this is why I'm sort of doing it like this, okay? Whereas obviously you don't have to go that far with it. This is real personal type of choice of how you're doing it all. But there we go, that's that top coat on there. We can stop now. I'm going to leave this literally to dry off totally for around 24 hours. So it completely go off, because otherwise, we said before, by handling this type of thing, what tends to happen is that you leave fingerprints in it and everything else like that, touch it. It seems dry, but it's not. And the other thing as well, because obviously we need to decal it and all things like that, we don't want it in a situation where perhaps it might shrink, it might grip the decal and crack them, and sometimes you get that crazy paving effect on decals. That's what it is. The actual paint isn't dry on top, so it needs time to dry. So we'll let that all dry off for the next day, come back, we can decal it, and then really start to bring it together.